Good morning, everybody. It's Mr. Piontek here, and I am just going to take a moment and walk you through Prose and her chapter on gesture. This is a breakdown of some important points that you are going to want to consider when you're reading and journaling for the week. So she starts off by detailing for us the definition of what a gesture is. And I think this is a great way, and you should always have this in your mind. Gesture is a small physical action, often unconscious or semi-reflexive, including what is called body language and excluding larger, more definite or momentous action. So, for example, a character tucking their hair behind their ear would be a gesture. A character smoothing their shirt out when they're looking in the mirror would be a gesture. A character pulling a gun on someone would not be a gesture. A character shoving someone or a character throwing something would not be a gesture. All right. So, again, you need to focus on that they're small, unconscious, semi reflexive actions. There are a lot of stock gestures out there, like clenching your fists or nervously tapping, but they are not an individual's particular response to a particular event, but rather a shorthand for common psychic states. So they're there to inform us and kind of allude to things that we already know and know how to interpret. We recognize these gestures, we've seen them used before, and we know what they mean. Gesture at its core, though, should try to be specific to the character and it must mean something. When it's used well, here are some different things that she says. It can be used to anchor the fiction in a recognizable human context. So even if it's an unrecognizable world, say like the world of Harry Potter, the very human gestures that the characters make help ground it in reality. On page 218, she has this wonderful excerpt where she talks about Gabriel from the story The Dead by James Joyce. And she talks about how his gestures are used as clues to what we can expect from him as we follow him through. And if we look at his initial gestures when he's having an opening conversation with the character Lily, you see so much of who he is in these gestures. And maybe you don't recognize it right away, but as you move through the story, it all comes together. She also talks about how if we see characters making a shift in the gestures they're making, it can indicate a change. And it also is sometimes used to indicate if a character is unstable or irrational in fiction, like she makes reference to a character from Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. Other ways that we know it used well is she talks about how gestures betray the unconscious, but in fact, there are many cases, and we are all too conscious of our gestures, and that too is a sort of revelation. So the fact that maybe a character notices or is very aware of the reflective, unconscious gestures they make, that tells us something on top of it. And what she's getting at ultimately is gesture can sometimes tell us more than words. They can get a point across to us better than words. And it can be also employed as a way for us to keep track of characters. And if you go and look on page 228, she talks about how Charles Dickens would do this, because he would have this massive cast of characters, but their individual little gestures were a way for you to remember who they were, if they were given something that was particular to them and very memorable. She talks about too and ends the chapter by giving us a bit of writing advice, so that if you're writing and there is a gesture or you're trying to create a gesture, if it does not add, then you need to get rid of it. And ultimately, she ends us with a question of, when looking at gesture, we have to ask ourselves, what can it reveal, but also what can it hide? So that is a very quick, very fast breakdown of the chapter on gesture. Take this into account as you're doing your next reading assignment for the things they carried, and I'll see you all later this week. Thank you.